June 10, 1944. Near Isigny, Normandy. Orders on paper lagged at the hedgerows. Field phones snapped under tracks. Sherman platoon executing a bound forward through dust, smoke, and cut lanes. No runner, no flare, no spare wire. Yet they moved as one. Across the line, a Panzer IV crew listened on a Fug 5 AM set. About 10 watts. Tank to tank, reach often a few kilometers in broken ground. The net hissed and faded as engines roared. A second set. The Fug 2. Watched a lower band for higher-level orders. But traffic fought static. The Americans used technology the enemy did not expect. SCR 508. BC 604. BC 603. BC 606 clear as a church bell. Factories in Chicago, Newark, and Camden cast. Wound and tested. Depots kitted sets, line crews wired hulls, crews trained on call signs, and this chain ran straight to the bocage. Not thicker armour, but a steadier net. In 1942, the U.S. standardized the SCR 508, a frequency modulation, FM, set around 20 to 27.9 MHz. 10 crystal-locked channels. About mid-tens of watts. Crews could talk. Fast. That choice would shape how American tanks fought. The claim was plain. When every tank could hear and be heard, a platoon became a single tool. German troops. Brave and skilled. Often did not know why the Shermans seemed to pivot and surge at once. They saw thin sides and high silhouettes and drew comfort. They did not see the signal that tied those shapes together. American doctrine before the war had gaps. Armour and infantry had split schools. Radios were rare, and field tests were mixed. But by 1943, the U.S. Armoured Force drilled voice procedure and net discipline across bases from Fort Knox to the Desert Training Center. The Army put a set in each command tank, and, more and more, in every gun tank. Numbers matter. The United States built about 49,000 Shermans. Sources vary by model count, but the scale stands so the net could scale too. A platoon leader on Channel A could snap a flank, call smoke, or switch to Channel B for company orders without fiddling a dial. 10 fixed channels meant less drift, so less waste. On AM, a burst of ignition noise rode the words. On FM, the limiter and discriminator trimmed noise past the capture point. That meant a clear word under fire was still a clear word. So what? Clear words cut seconds. Seconds saved crews. Production kept pace. Tens of thousands of FM sets left lines at Motorola and Western Electric. Exact set totals vary by year. But the flow-filled hulls. This was the bridge from plant to field. The German side had radios too, and early war panzer units used them well. But many platoon tanks still lacked full transceivers deep into the war. Some had only receivers. Some infantry carried no sets at all. The Wehrmacht relied on practiced hand signals and line-of-sight cues that the hedgerows killed. American FM did not make better gunners by itself. It gave average crews a steady tempo. A lieutenant could say, hold down, red, push right. And 3 tanks would act without a flag or flare. That was the thesis. Not that the Sherman was a better gun or a thicker shield. It was a better node. The set weighed on the order of 100 pounds installed, but it paid that weight back in control. The whip antenna was short enough for woods. The control head sat by the commander's elbow. The troop did not have to wait for a runner who might not return. In the din, AM heard noise, FM rejected noise, therefore clarity under fire, and clarity. Repeated across 5 tanks. Built trust. The first time a crew heard the limiter cut the hiss as the net locked, they learned that the voice would be there the next time too. A system is a promise. The U.S. kept that promise with spare crystals, trained net control, and set up drills. The Germans did not know the scope at first. They saw smoke shells land fast and thought pre-plot. They saw a switch of axis and thought luck. They did not know every Sherman in that lane could hear the same calm voice. 2 anchor facts carry the so what. 10 channels meant clean nets per company, so orders cut friction. About 49,000 Shermans meant the net covered a continent, so saturation. Not samples. That is how industry became tactics. And that is why men in grey, crouched in a hedgerow slit, felt outmaneuvered by men in olive steel who were, on paper, outgunned. The network made the paper lie. Because that network made the paper lie, the rest of the system could work. The U.S. built a voice web on frequency modulation, FM, sets and taught crews to use it. The German side leaned on amplitude modulation, AM, sets and visual signals, because FM limite noise, crews could speak in short words. Because the channels were crystal locked, sets held tune through heat and shock, therefore words stayed clean. Because every tank in a platoon carried a transceiver, leaders could delegate quick. Therefore no one gun became a choke point, while AM nets hissed when engines surged. The FM limiter cut the roar, therefore the phrase that mattered still cut through. While AM sets had to hunt a precise spot, the crystal-cut channels stayed fixed. Therefore, net changes took seconds, not minutes. While staff meant to keep flow by runners and flares, hedges and fire broke both. Therefore, voice took the load. The contrast ran deeper than parts. It ran through how men thought. The U.S. taught net control, brevity codes, and call signs as daily drill. Orders used verbs first, so the gun moved first, whereas many German platoon tanks still had only receivers, or none. American gun tanks could all talk, so the loss of the command tank did not kill the net. Distribution mattered. Few transceivers versus every tanker node, therefore no single point of failure. Stability mattered. Variable-tuned drift versus crystal-locked channels, therefore coordination holds. Mode mattered. AM hears noise. FM rejects noise, therefore clarity under fire. Terrain mattered. Multipath kills AM. FM rides valleys, therefore range survives. Not thicker steel. Not a wider track, but a cleaner net. A Sherman commander could say, hold, smoke left, red push. And 3 hulls answered in stride. Because the BC-604 transmitter shared crystals with the BC-603 receiver, channel steps were simple. Therefore a switch to company net took 1 click. Because the control head sat by the cupola, the commander did not climb down. Therefore his eyes stayed on arcs. Because antenna whips were short and set back, they snagged less in brush. Therefore nets lived longer in woods, whereas AM sets in a Panzer IV might carry 10 watts. The U.S. FM set pushed mid-tens with capture effect, so the stronger voice seized the ear. Therefore the right words beat the wrong ones. German crews were brave and skilled. They used hand flags, Turretgestures, and prearranged signs. While those worked in open steppes, they failed in Norman lanes, because hedges broke line of sight. The human net broke. Therefore small fights turned on small words. A net that held tune turned squads into teams. The limiter made a promise. If you press to talk, your words arrive. Because men believed that. They acted faster. Therefore the platoon gained tempo. Once tempo tilted, gunnery stats followed. A tank that moves first often fires first. Because voice gave the cue, the hull moved a second sooner. Therefore the first round went downrange in less time. Field drills timed one simple pair. 5 to 7 seconds versus 20 to 30 seconds. Orders reach guns sooner. That saved lives. The U.S. also cut failure paths. In German nets, a platoon could wait for the one full transceiver tank. If it died, the rest went deaf. Whereas in a U.S. platoon, the next tank took the net. So the fight kept shape. Therefore local shocks did not break the whole. Because crystals locked frequency, there was less need to ride the dial. Therefore stress bent hands less. Because FM rejected most ignition crackle, the words stayed plain under throttle. Therefore drivers could keep speed while commanders spoke. The design shaped tactics. Leaders used bound and overwatch as a spoken drill. White hold. Red move. Blue cover. Because each move was small and clear. There was no traffic jam. Therefore guns stayed spaced and arcs stayed clean, whereas an AM net might drift and force repeats. The FM net kept each repeat rare, so airtime stayed short. Therefore more orders fit the same minute. The system scaled up. Company nets on one channel, platoon work on another. Battalion had its own. Because channels were fixed and known, planners wrote SOPs that matched. Therefore units met on the right ladder rung. The Germans had their own strengths. Early in the war they used radios well. They built good sets and drilled hard. But strain, loss, and supply broke even a fine school, because factories fell behind and spare sets were scarce. Distribution thinned. Therefore more crews fell back to signs and habit. Meanwhile the U.S. piled sets into hulls as fast as tanks rolled off lines. Because depots shipped crystals and spares with each kit, maintenance kept pace. Therefore nets did not fade as months passed. The effect was plain in bad ground. In the bocage, multipath and shadow hit AM hard. Echoes smeared words. Whereas FM captured the strongest path and clipped the bounce. So the useful range outlived the map line. Therefore leaders could still reach the far hedge. In towns, the story held. Steel and stone blocked sight. Fire jammed alleys. Because the net still worked, leaders could stack smoke, call a flank, or pull back one street. Therefore losses dropped when the plan turned. The comparison kept pointing to one truth. Radios do not kill tanks. Crews do. A steady net makes average crews act like a team. Because of that, thin armour mattered less than a thin delay. Therefore a lighter gun on time beat a heavier gun late. When old hands said the Sherman was radio-rich, they were not joking. They meant it was time-rich. And time wins fights like a sharp knife. That is how the network made the paper lie. Day after day, lane after lane, until the habit hardened into doctrine and the doctrine hardened into odds. No single duel could explain. Meanwhile, the habit hardened into doctrine, lane after lane, until odds spent in real duels. Operation Cobra gave a clean test. The hedgerow fight near Saint-Lô had chewed up plans. Dust. Smoke. and short lines of sight made units fight by squads. The U.S. answer linked voice, drills, and steel. Company nets stayed on one fixed channel. Platoons worked on another. Forward elements used the same brevity and call signs each day. Because the SCR 508's 10 crystal-locked channels did not drift, leaders could pre-assign who spoke where. Therefore, changes needed no hunt on the dial. Because FM cut engine crackle and spark noise, a two-word order could ride a march column. Therefore, speed did not kill control. In the push that broke the line on July 25, 1944, tank infantry gaps showed fast. Rifle squads lost tanks in the corn. Tankers rolled past pinned GIs. Problem stated: guns and eyes were not on the same net. The fix came in two parts. First, the net ladder put a platoon leader on company for a minute, then back down with one click, so he could sync with infantry support by relay. Second, units began to bolt a rear hull infantry tank telephone tied to the intercom. An EE-8-style handset let a squad leader plug in and talk to the commander. Sources vary on model marks and dates, but the change spread in late 1944. Result followed. A pinned squad called "Smoke That Hedge." 2 lengths left. The tank answered at once while staying on the platoon net. Because the same voice rules held across sets, the talk stayed short. Therefore, the gun was on the right hedge in seconds. An Army technical manual noted the heart of it. The SCR 508 provides 10 crystal-controlled channels. TM11 600. So what? 10 set channels meant a company net, a battalion net, a mortar net, and still room for air-ground liaison by relay, therefore less crosstalk under strain. Heinz Guderian long before had written that wireless made armoured control possible. Wireless was the most important weapon of the Panzer Force. Sources vary on exact wording. So what? Even the pioneer of the method marked the edge. On Cobra's second day, a battalion of Shermans used voice to shift the point of attack along a farm lane without halting. A company commander keyed once for smoke, once for the flank. The platoons bound past each other while still under German mortar fire. Times told the tale. Tank-to-tank range ran about 3 to 5 miles in bocage covers company width. Net change time was about 2 to 4 seconds. Orders jump faster. A platoon drill cut first round time by 5 to 10 seconds earlier fire wins. An artillery checkfire issued in under 30 seconds, fewer short rounds. Each number had a plain "So what?" coverage across the company. No talking past each other. Early steel on target. Fewer friendly losses. Because range held in folds and valleys. The net linked the far hedge to the near one. Therefore, platoons could wheel on contact rather than freeze. Because net control enforced short calls, the air stayed free for the one call that mattered. Therefore, the smoke screen showed up where it should, when it should. German defenders saw the ground rip and thought it was all pre-planned. It was not. It was planned tempo held by live voice. A captured report after the Morton counterattack noted Allied rapid regrouping under pressure. Radio made that regrouping safe. Where failure paths did appear, the system patched them. Early hedgerow fights showed that infantry off the tank lost the net. That was the gap. The fix. The hull phone. Plus more SCR 300 backpack FM sets with rifle companies. Tied squads to steel in the same voice style. Result. Rescue came sooner. Fire lifted faster. And friendly tanks stopped blasting blind hedges. A numbers with meaning pair from unit drills summed the shift. 3 to 5 minutes versus 15 to 30 minutes smoke and support arrive sooner, crews live. Even with good German gunnery. That time swing cut loss spikes. Not A. Not B. But C. Not a miracle gun. Not a magic cutter. But a cleaner net that let average crews do hard work on time, because the network ran on fixed channels and spare crystals. A shot-up platoon could reform under a new leader without a tech. Therefore local shock did not turn to rout, because company and battalion kept separate channels. Higher orders did not drown platoon fights. Therefore small units kept freedom of action. Whereas AM nets in panzer units drifted with heat and engine load, and some tanks still had only receivers. The American net stayed two-way down to the gun tanks. Therefore the loss of one command tank did not send four others silent. And when the push reached open country, the same rules gave chase speed. A lead platoon called bends and ambush cues by voice, not by flare, because the order gun left. Hull right took a breath to send. The column snaked through fire without bunching. Therefore a German rear guard could not stack targets. In after-action notes, officers kept the language plain, brevity, discipline, channel plan. The proof sat in the ground gained and the hours saved. By the time U.S. units crossed the Vire and turned south, the network had turned from kit to reflex. That reflex, more than any one duel, explained why the line broke. Because that reflex, not any one duel, explained why the line broke. The results cascaded. Units that trusted the net fought faster, then marched farther. Because orders moved by voice, logistics moved on time. Therefore fuel and ammo reached hot corners before they froze. Because net control kept higher torque off platoon channels. Small teams kept freedom of action. Therefore the grind of hedgerows turned into a rolling push. The Germans felt it first as pace. A local win at a gate did not halt the next bound. Because the next platoon already had the route and smoke plan, it bypassed the knot. Therefore strongpoints bled out instead of stopping a whole day. Staff learned new math. If a company could re-task 2 platoons in a minute, then corps could shift a boundary in an hour. Therefore the front bent where the map said it should not. The radio made that math real. Leaders wrote cleaner orders. Go here. Face there. Smoke now. Because verbs came first. Gunners move first. Therefore arty shifts and tank bounds meshed. The habit reached the Allies. British armour crews noted the shorter call flow. Canadian units copied the Hull phone trick. Because the language was plain and short, liaison grew simpler. Therefore task forces snapped together on the road. The net also made mercy work faster, because wounded calls cut through without repeats. Medics reached crews with less risk. Therefore survival rose at the margins. Numbers told a calm story. Tank-to-tank range in rough ground sat around 3 to 5 miles. Est. Company frontage covered. Panzer AM sets often managed less in clutter. Est. 1 to 2 miles gaps formed. That pair had meaning. 3 to 5 miles versus 1 to 2 miles company coverage holds. Because coverage held, reserves could act on the first call, not the third. Therefore a broken flank became a bend, not a tear. None of this made the Sherman a heavy. German guns still bit. The net did not stop a shell. It stopped delay, pioneered wide FM tank nets, yet lacked heavy armour. The irony ran through after-action notes. Crews cursed thin plate, then praised the set that steered them out of a bad field. Because they could talk. They could refuse a kill sack. Therefore, survival rose even under long-barreled fire. The network also shaped air-ground ties. U.S. Army Air Forces, USAAF, fighter bombers, worked with forward air controllers on FM ladders by relay. Because ground units could pass a grid in one breath, pilots found the right hedge. Therefore, friendly fire fell as language tightened. When the force hit rivers and towns, the pattern deepened. At Remagen, bridging needed control in the crush. Because radio nets split traffic by level, engineers got their windows. Therefore, the bridge held under shelling while armor crossed in packets. In the Ruhr pocket, the voice habit crushed the last chance of a breakout. Because battalions could swing a gate and close a road within minutes, columns met roadblocks where they mattered. Therefore, corrosion, not collision, ended resistance. The Wehrmacht, short on sets, leaned on pre-plan and nerve. They struck hard when they could see. They lost pace when they could not speak. Not thicker steel, not a bigger gun, but a steadier net. The lesson moved from field to book. Manuals froze brevity, call signs, and channel ladders into doctrine. Because the parts were cheap by wartime scale, the army put them in everything that rolled. Therefore, the habit crossed from tanks to half-tracks and recon cars. Postvar. The track continued. NATO standards favoured FM voice for land nets. Because the World War had proved the capture effect in muck and towns, the next armies kept it. Therefore, the Cold War brigade drill kept the same bones. Limits stayed real. FM line of sight still hated mountains and deep cities. Antennas still snapped on trees. Batteries still did. Because of those limits, the army pushed relays, telomests, and later, repeaters. Therefore, the promise held across worse ground. Credit had to be shared. Industry wound coils and cut crystals at scale. Trainers hammered net control until it stuck. Quartermasters shipped spares with the sets. Because each link kept faith, the system kept faith. Therefore, an average crew met a hard day with an even chance. Critics still point to duels the Sherman lost. Those duels were real. Yet the net explained why the line still moved. Because the network shrank delay, it grew force. Therefore, small wins stacked into days, then into months. If earlier reports praised the gun, later records showed the signal. The crew who lived to send one more short call carried the truth. The Germans often never knew why the American turn came so fast. They heard hiss and guessed luck. They faced a plan that lived on air. Radios won tempo. The net beat the gun.